Terence Ward, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Christiane.
So your book, the premise of it is that a sort of overlooked aspect of the global terrorism that we face today is how much of it is inspired by this Wahhabism, this sort of Salafism that is emblematic of Saudi Arabia. So tell me about that.
I grew up in the Middle East. I grew up in Saudi Arabia, then Iran, and then Cairo and Egypt. And I have many Muslim friends. And I felt so much pain viscerally from my friends over the years because there was this huge misunderstanding, which I had seen in Saudi Arabia, which many have understood is there are footprints, or at least fingerprints, on much of what we call global terrorism that emanate through Wahhabism, but it's never been really spelled out. Now, Sunni Islam is 1,400 years old. So this is a very, very new cult, sect, doctrine. The problem is now that it's the official creed of Saudi Arabia, and it's also the inspiring ideology of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, and many would argue the Taliban.
I think a lot of people, particularly in America, have looked just as at Iran as the global sponsors of terrorism. Why did you feel that it's even important to distinguish and raise a whole nother? I mean, the whole world is quite happy holding Iran accountable.
If certain powers that be hold to their wishes, I believe we're on the verge of another war, and this will be a third American war in the Middle East, ostensibly to deal with terrorism.
You're talking about in Iran?
Against Iran. Let me just cite a simple set of facts, because it's not enough to just look at that question. Let's look at the global terrorism database that is based in King's College, London. Cites that more than 94% of the deaths caused by Islamic terrorism since 2001 were perpetrated by Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, and other Sunni jihadists. Now, almost every terrorist attack in the West has had some connection to Saudi Arabia. Virtually none has been linked with Iran. So I would ask, if we're about to go into another conflict that will cost another $1 trillion, how many countless lives will be spent? And virtually none of these terrorist attacks have been linked to Iran. Are we making the right choice? How is it possible that the Saudis have escaped the scrutiny?
Well, that's my question to you. How is it possible then that since 9/11, when this mantra that 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudis, that they have escaped the kind of scrutiny that Iran is under, as a matter of course, every day?
Perhaps all we have to do is just look at what has just happened. The entire US Senate, divided on every issue, absolutely not even able to have a Christmas party together. They passed a unanimous resolution condemning and holding the Crown Prince accountable for the murder and obvious decapitation, dismemberment of Khashoggi.
So are you basically saying that we couldn't even have this conversation, and the body politic wouldn't even take it very seriously if it hadn't been for the concentrating effect of the murder of Khashoggi?
I think so.
So that's one question. But then how did the Saudis escape the kind of scrutiny post 9/11?
Well, I think the silence has been purchased. There has been a lot of collaboration on the American side. Look, when the first jihadis went over to Afghanistan, that was part of an American project, very much sponsored by American entities. The fact that...
You're talking about the Mujahideen?
The Mujahideen, and the fact that then bin Laden...
Against the Soviet occupation.
Against the Soviet occupation. When that began, and from 79 on, that was very much a collaborative effort. When it went rogue and turned, that's when it became difficult.
Let's just unpick it.
Yes.
So, Wahhabism started and is fundamental to Saudi Arabia. That's an accepted historical religious fact. What is the link between the House of Saud and Wahhabism? And are you actually saying something that most people disagree with, that the government, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, official Saudi Arabia sponsors terrorism? Or what are you saying?
No, I'm not saying that the kingdom sponsors it. What I'm saying is that within Wahhabism, which the House of Saud are Wahhabis. They are the titular leaders of the political body, of which the Wahhabi clerics give their allegiance. This faith was founded by Abdul Wahhab in 1744. It was a very austere, a very puritanical interpretation of the Quran, essentially dismissing 1400 years of history.
A more moderate Islam, a
all
more
of the
tolerant
traditional,
Islam.
moderate, tolerant, cosmopolitan Islam was dismissed.
Just why was it pushed aside at that time?
Because very much like what Luther said when he held up his book and said, only the book, nothing else, Abdul Wahhab said the same thing.
You in your book talk about the 5 imperial Wahhabi projects that launched this very doctrinaire, medieval version of Islam, intolerant version of Islam, and let it flourish.
Exactly.
And this happened in the last 40 years.
40 years.
So start, which is the first one?
After 1973, there was an extraordinary cash flow into the kingdom. With that...
That's because of the oil.
Because of the oil embargo that led to higher oil prices. And all of a sudden, the kingdom found itself flush with funds. Those within the Wahhabi community said, well, now it's time to really spread the word. And the word they called the mission, the Dawah Wahhabiyah. And the spreading of the word involved building madrasas and sending imams to different parts of the world. So the mainstream, traditional Islam that we were talking about, the tolerant, cosmopolitan Islam, in certain countries found itself under threat. Under threat because, for instance, the first example, Pakistan. Zia al-Haq takes over power, but then he adopts Sharia law. One thing he does also is he allows for Saudi funds to come in to the western borders to build madrasas. For whom? For all of the Afghani refugees that had spilled out after the Russian invasion. Number 2, the students who were trained in those madrasas, the word talib in Arabic,
they become the Taliban in Afghanistan. Yeah,
and they take over the
20 years
country.
later. Yeah.
But
What's
then,
the third project?
The third project was Al-Qaeda, of course. Saudi nationals, for the most part, along with bin Laden, they come out of that tradition. Now, back to your question, is the government funding? No, there are religious institutions, there are charities, there are all sorts of ways that money funneled in through private donors, but private donors that found this a very attractive, a very appealing cause. That becomes the third. The fourth becomes ISIS.
And the fifth project?
The fifth is Euro-Islam, or the Euro-Wahhabi project, which began because in 1970...
All this spate of terrorism that we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years.
And again, I say, why did I write the book? Let's go back and connect the dots. Because without connecting the dots, we live in fear with no context. And it's not 1.5 billion Muslims are behind this. Let's go back and connect the dots. 1973, King Badwin. Facing the incredible leap of prices, very nationalistically, he calls out to King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, who happens to be visiting. And he says...
This is the Belgian King Badwin.
The Belgian King Badwin. And he says, would you perhaps give us a discount? And in return, I will give you the tropical pavilion in Brussels for your first mosque. Well, King Faisal, of course, said yes. And there is the largest Wahhabi mosque in Europe. Now, there are 77 mosques within Brussels proper. All of the fighters who ended up on the streets of Paris on that Friday the 13th night in November of 2015 came from that community.
The Bataclan murders.
That's right. So when I say another export, it's not simply Brussels. It's Kosovo. It's Bosnia. You've been to those countries. You've
Many
seen
Saudi mosques in Bosnia.
You've seen the Saudi mosques that have erased what was a traditional, mainstream, cosmopolitan, very interesting form of Islam that had lived in this multi-ethnic environment, thrived in that environment for years.
So then, surely you would have been pleased a few years ago when Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman starts to talk about moderating and modernizing Islam. This is Mohammed bin Salman during one of those Riyadh investment conferences. We are returning to what we were before, a country of moderate Islam that is open to all religions and to the world.
I would say that his intentions are very, very positive. Now, when he says return to the tolerant Islam we had before, I would beg to differ. I grew up there. There wasn't a sense of tolerance. The difference being Iran has gone through a very intolerant moment, but that is not the history of the country. Saudi Arabia has always been Wahhabi.
Do you think he means then, do you think he means go back to the sense of maybe tolerant Muslim, moderate Islam that predated Wahhabism in the Islamic world?
Look, I think the whole Islamic world would be thrilled. Again, I wrote the book because I have so many Muslim friends who feel absolutely ostracized because of what's taken place. Can he turn back to that more, shall we say, tolerant version of Islam, traditional version of Islam? That would be terrific. I think he would find great resistance. Remember, this is a country that doesn't have a single church, a single temple, a single synagogue. It is absolutely prohibited. So, what does turning back to mean? Does it mean welcoming in all the other faiths? I think the world would welcome that. The problem with his role and the role of his father is they're also custodians of the holy shrines.
So that's Mecca and Medina, the holiest shrines in Islam.
And you can't imagine the weight, the moral weight that that holds, especially in places like Indonesia and Malaysia and other parts of the world.
So what actually is the way forward? Because if a new, young crown prince of Saudi Arabia, which is, you know, ground zero for Wahhabism, if he's saying stuff and it's not enough, and plus he's compromised now with the global focus after the Khashoggi murder, and even those who are in his corner and backing him and supporting him in the American media, in Congress, etc., are turning against him. What is the hope then? How does this virulent strain of austere Islam get neutralized?
Well, I think he, in those actions, has been very positive because it's been a wake-up call for the country. I think after the failure of ISIS in Syria, and after the possibility of this silence being broken and people connecting the dots of historical linkages in the past, I think that all of that has been positive. Let us hope that it can continue, and everyone, as you know, that has come back from Saudi Arabia said there is this air of positivity in the air. But women are still saying, what about all our activists who are in prison? Women are still saying, I am my own guardian. I don't want to
This is the guardianship
have the
law.
guardianship
He allowed
law.
women to drive, but he didn't change the fundamental root of the oppression against women. The United States has framed the battle for supremacy in that region between bad, evil Iran and decent ally Saudi Arabia. What needs to happen to create some kind of a tipping point that neutralizes Wahhabism, or is that not possible? I mean, obviously the Saudis went to war against their own terrorists, Wahhabi terrorists, when they attacked them, you know, in 2003. What more do they need to do?
Well, in fact, what ISIS leaders have always said is, we are better Wahhabis than you are, and claimed that the Saudis and the royal family were in fact fallen Wahhabis, and that they were the pure ones carrying the pure message forward. I think they've understood that this is a huge problem that keeps coming back to revisit them. Let's be sane about our next steps, because we can't afford other crises. But a strategic relationship that doesn't share democracy, freedom of worship, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, or human rights is transactional.
I mean, the most interesting thing, I guess, about this moment is that all those things, as you said, were always off the table. They could never be discussed during bilateral relationships. Now that's changed. Should Saudi's main allies decide to go that route? Because in the aftermath of Khashoggi, that's all changed. So we'll see what happens. Terence Ward, thank you for coming in.
Thank you so much, Christiane.